Welcome all. This is Azure Community Conference 2021. This is the third day of the conference, and we have already covered a lot of sessions. And like in today morning, we also had a couple of workshops. This workshop is specifically, quick introduction. My name is Nandeesh. I work as a program manager in the Identity and Security division of Microsoft. I work on the App and Dev division in the Identity org. So without further ado, let me get started with this workshop. Like I said, this conference has already had a lot of great sessions. You will probably have a recording of those sessions, and in case you missed that, you'll be able to view them. This session is as well recorded. There's also a script, a step-by-step script which you can go through. I put it in the chat, and the idea is the power of Azure Graph, right? We'll go through a lot of demos. I'll lay out, I'll lay the groundwork for you so that you can get started. The slide, the demos are all part of my GitHub. You can go anytime, download the demos, look at the slide, run through the script, run the demos, and work through it. All right, without further ado, power of Azure Graph. Okay, this is the brief agenda as to what we'll do. Graph intro, permissions and consent, Graph Explorer, Graph Toolkit, coding with advanced graph queries, pagination and more, and how to be a Graph Pro developer. Right. So this is what we'll cover. At the end of the day, I would want you to take away that Graph is a great platform for you to query and get data in Microsoft 365, and then Graph SDK helps you code with ease, and then some of the important features when you're coding with Graph. These are some things that I wanted to take away with this session. Let's get started. Okay, what is Graph, right? So Graph is, like I said, it's basically REST API, which is designed to be agnostic, language agnostic, very simple syntax, supports a lot of advanced features. Very easy for you to go get the data, right? Essentially, it's a gateway to all Microsoft 365 applications, right? If you see, how it works is essentially this is like how your data is laid out. Like you have your email, you have your identities, you have cloud, and so many other things, and there are different workloads, right? And I, as a developer, let's say I want to call into those. I want to sort of get data from, let's say, my Outlook, or let's say my identity. What do? I need to sort of code for each of these applications or each of these systems, right? But what Azure Graph does is, it sort of helps you. Microsoft Graphs helps you to sort of come in between you as a developer and then all these platforms, and you'll be able to easily code. To put it, it's a language agnostic gateway to data in cloud. So that's my definition of Microsoft Graph. All right. So essentially, Graph API is a unified endpoint, for all productivity, identity, and security data sets. What does that mean, right? If you see, essentially, the data is not really like there's a boundary between you and all of the data exists there. It is essentially like this, where all of it is connected, right? It's not like a boundary and you're this side of the boundary and then there is Graph, and then on the other side we have all these data. It's essentially all this is connected, and what Graph does is it sort of gives you a beautiful way to query and get the data from there. All right, so all right, that's good. Now, what all data can I get in Graph? Is it like I can pretty much query anything in the Microsoft side of things, in Azure side of things, Microsoft 365 side of things? Essentially, yes, but then there are workloads. A lot of workloads are getting added as well. It is definitely a platform for the future and the present, and it has been there since quite some time. So the most popular workloads are users, groups, files, mail, calendar, tasks. Users and groups from the identity side of things, files, mail, calendar, tasks are something we see where a lot of queries are done. But then there are tons of other data sets as well, what we call as workloads. And what happens is, this is pretty much a bird's eye view of your architecture where, you have your app. It could be anything. It could be a desktop. It could be a web or any kind of a service or anything like that, which calls into graph.microsoft.com. And then we lay into these workloads. So these are all the data sets. I have just captured some of the most important data sets. There are many, many more, but essentially we call into these data sets. All right. In order to sort of call the Graph API, one of the four most important concept is permissions and consent, right? Essentially, Microsoft identity, right? A user has to prove their identity, essentially that's where you give your credentials and all that to authenticate. And the next point, the next part is applications need authorization, right? You need to be authorized, right? When I say you, essentially you will have a permission set, and then your app, right? Like let's say you're using Outlook, it will have a permission set, right? Your app needs certain level of authorization to call that APIs, and how that happens is through permissions and consent, right? And essentially there we have two types of permissions, right? A is a delegated permission, B is an application permission. What is a delegated permission? It is like on behalf of Nandeesh, let's say my app, like app A is trying to call into Outlook APIs or is trying to get some mail data. So it needs to have, let's say, mail.read. Like for instance, I have built an app which sort of helps me get all the important bank emails and sort of project it on my screen, right? I mean, what do I do for it, right? Of course, you'll be building all the API and you'll be calling the Graph API, but then to call the Graph API, you need that permission. And what is that permission, right? It's essentially mail.read, right? So that is on behalf of user. That's called a delegated permission. And then there is application permission, a daemon kind of app, a service, which will sort of, do things in the backend kind of a thing. That's when you need an application permission. So essentially a delegated permission and application permission, these are the two types of permissions we have. The next important point is applications specify the range of operation they require by requesting a scope. What does that mean, right? My app is going to call into mails. It's going to get data from mails. I need to ensure I request scope. What I mean by scope is essentially scope is nothing but permission. When you're coding, you sort of call it scope, but then I'm requesting a permission. That's what requesting a scope means, which is covered here. So my app, coming back to my app, right? It is going to call into to read emails. I need to ensure I only ask for mail.read. I should not ask for OneNote. I should not ask for, let's say, OneDrive or let's say users, right? I need to only ask for permissions for the API that my app is going to call. And it's very essential, right, that you sort of declare these beforehand. I'll show you in the upcoming demos where do we declare that, but essentially we need to declare that much before in hand, right? Applications must follow a least privileged approach. What does that mean? The point I just mentioned. Ask for the least privileged approach, right? Like, do you want to, are you going to read emails? Yes, then ask for mail.read. Don't ask for mail.read, right? Are you going to read only your emails? Then just do mail.read. Don't do mail.read.all, where essentially you're trying to read other users' emails as well. And this whole concept, you might feel it's pretty mechanic, but then when everything is put together, you can control a lot of different things through this, right? And it essentially makes your app a lot safer. And then we have this concept of admin consent and user consent. What does that mean? Admin consent, there are certain types of permissions which can be consented only by admin. What does that admin consent mean? Like, I as a user, I'm using an app, let's say an app which sort of gets my emails, right? I'm also having a feature in my app which will read other users' emails. And for that, I need mail.read.all. which can be only consented by an admin. Like I ask for that permission. Okay, I need to read, let's say, Anbu's emails, right? And when I call it to that API, it says, okay, boss, you don't have that permission. And then it pops up that admin consent where I consent for my permission. And then it needs to be consented by an admin. The admin needs to give me that permission to go ahead and do that. So essentially, what I mean by all this is that effective permissions for you, let's say as a user A, is essentially your permission level. Like as a user, what all can you do in your tenant, right? In your identity tenant, plus what all can your app do? So when you combine these two, the Venn diagram of these two is what you will be essentially be able to do with your app. Moving ahead, how do we request scope? You talked about scope requesting permission through code. How do we do that? We do it through this. We use msal.acquire token silent. Then we also have acquire token, like, we have, this is a silent call where essentially you're trying to get a token. And when you're trying to get a token, you mention the scope. I need to do a user.read. I need to read a user's permission. And that's when you do acquire token silent. And silent essentially here means that you don't really prompt the user for that consent screen and all those things. You might have already had that token and you just move on. The same thing, you can do it through acquire token interactive, right? So these are the two ways, and this is how you send your scope. And this is all the permissions that are there in Microsoft Graph. You can see there are tons of them. And Graph, like for instance, users, groups, calendars, cross-device experiences, and many more. So when you're consenting for a permission, this is how I'm pretty sure you might have seen these in our screens, and that's essentially what is the whole of permissions and consent framework. Here, if you see, we are trying to sort of ask for a permission. You can always, like, if you read through this, it says this app would like to maintain access to data you've given it access to, sign you in and read your profile. Essentially, what we are doing here is we're just doing a user.read, right? And that's why it says sign you in and read your profile. And the first one, what it essentially means that is, once we allow you to read the profile information, you will always have access to it, because we sort of consider that you will store that data somewhere, right? Even if we revoke access, you'll still be able to have access to the data. So that's what it means. Okay, permission names, right? Like what is the syntax for the permission names? User.read, user.read.all, right? So user is the resource, read is the operation, and all is the constraint. What does that constraint mean? Constraint means, like, what is the potential extent of the access for the app it will have? Like, for instance, am I reading all users' profile, or am I just reading my profile? No constraint is essentially limiting the, like, it's performing the operations only by the signed in user. All right. So a lot of information here. We will get into like a demos where I will showcase what exactly I mean here, and it'll be more clearer. But then this is the groundwork that I talked about. It's very important to know this when you're sort of coding on Graph. And then what are the permission levels, right? I mean, these are some examples of permission level. Here I talked about admin consent, right? User.read, user.read write, user.read basic.all do not need admin consents. User.read.all, user.read.write.all need admin consent. That's because they are sort of like a high profile operation, and you don't really want everyone to get to do those operations. So you want to sort of limit it. Okay, let's get on with the demo. The best way to learn Graph is through Graph Explorer, and we'll sort of try to mimic what we are trying to do in Graph Explorer through a simple demo. So let me go. How do you go to Graph Explorer? Is ak.ms/ge. This will take you to Graph Explorer, and then you'll be able to see tons of sample APIs that we have. You will be able to sort of build your own APIs here. So let me sign in. Okay. So essentially, there are, I want to talk a little bit about these tabs here. So if you see, we have the operations, the standard REST API operations: get, post, put, patch, delete. And then we have v1.o and beta, right? v1.o, anything that you want to do on release, your production app, ensure that you're using v1. And then we have this beta feature where you will have some upcoming APIs which you will be able to use and query. So if I run this, like essentially I've already done that, and if you see, it is sort of returning my information. You will be able to can copy this in the Notepad++. And we can just do a quick scan of what data it is. So it just essentially gives information with respect to like my profile. Data.context, it essentially shows what all information like the city and department and all that. For me, it's a null because this is like a demo user that I've created for this demo. Looks like it's become dark. Give me a moment. Yeah, get back. All right, so that's all this information that we have. Now, what is more to be seen here is permissions. This is what we already talked about, right? Okay, these are the various permission levels that we have. It shows the ones that have are consented for, and what are the permissions where you don't need a consent. Like for instance, I've already consented for directory read all, directory read all for some other API that I was calling, and admin consent required. This shows you, right? Okay. It's required, it's not required. If it's not required, there's a cross because it's just user.read. Here we're just doing a user.read, and we can look at some more APIs. Okay, list all the applications with count. Let's try to run this. Okay, I think it's already run, and yeah, so essentially you will be able to see, this is essentially for getting all the apps that I've registered with my name in Azure AD, and then you will be able to sort of look at these tabs, right? Like if you want to, let's say, code in your sample and do the same query, you can just use the sample, right? And that pretty much works for any of these queries. You'll be able to use the code snippet, and it supports 4 languages right now: Objective-C, Java, JavaScript, and C#. And then you have response headers as well. It might be useful in cases where there is some data getting returned in the response. And then you have this request body, right? These will be useful for scenarios. Let's say I want to create a Teams channel with my name, and let's name it AzConf1. Okay, so this is the request body, and request headers essentially useful for scenarios of post. So if you run this, it pretty much runs, and it should create a Teams by that name. Let's see the response. Yeah, it's a 202. So essentially it has created that. And you may be not seeing the permissions tab right now because I've already created a lot of them before, and that's why you don't see the permissions consent coming up. Let's try to do something on OneNote. Okay, let's create a OneNote. So I don't have okay, it looks like I don't need a consent here. Like, see, if you see, I don't really have, what do you say, like it says, you need to consent to permissions on the modify permissions preview tab. So essentially, I need to consent for these. Like, let's say I need to do a notes, like I need to, if I need to create a OneNote, I need to have notes.create, and it says signing you in. This is the kind of prompt, which we saw in the slide. It says create your no open notebooks. If you just scroll it down, it gives you more information of what it is. Allows the app to view files, the titles of your note, OneNote notebooks and sections, blah, blah, blah. View your basic profile and maintain access to it. And then it also says consent on behalf of your organization. This is only seen if you are an admin of the tenant. So this user, I have a tenant Amplify, and in that it's an admin. You will only see this, and if I do check this and do it, essentially none of the users, I'm like sort of like consenting on behalf of my organization. So that's what it means. I'm not going to do that. Otherwise, it goes ahead and creates a OneNote notebook. All right, so this is how you do it, right? Now, the interesting part is I showed you some code snippets, right? Like, can we sort of use that and create a quick .NET sample? And let's say, should we be able to get some details and do that in a .NET application, right? Essentially, what I've done is, let me go to my demo. I have created OK, before we go there, one more important part is app registration, right? What is app registration? For you to utilize all the, all the features that, Azure Identity provides, whether it is authentication, authorization, and many other things like permissions and consent, you need to have your app registered, right? And just having a user there wouldn't really help. You need, if like, let's say you have a .NET application or a Java application or any kind of application, a web or a desktop or mobile, anything, you need to have an app registered. And how do you do that? You go to your Azure AD tenant. This is my Azure AD tenant, and just say new registration. I mean, go to app registrations. In that, go to new registration, and you pretty much give your name here. Like you can give any name. Let's say test AzConf. OK, and essentially what this means is, would accounts in this organization directory be able to use this app, or any AD directory, or any AD directory plus the MSA accounts? So, or just the Microsoft accounts. When you click on register, it goes ahead and registers. Let me show you, once you register, what are those important features that we look for. Looks like the light has turned off again. Sorry for that. Sorry for the inconvenience. All right, let me go to one of the registered apps and API permissions. OK, so I talked about a user sort of declaring their permissions beforehand, right? This is where they do it, right? Like, let's say my app, this app, AzConfDemo, is going to read and write files for all. I need this permission. Likewise, you have tons of other permissions where, you go to Microsoft Graph, you say delegated permissions or application permissions. Like I said, application permissions is for those apps which run in as a background service or daemon without a signed in user. And this is for scenarios that I talked about, like an app, and you will be able to sign in and get access. So you just select this and pretty much search and get the permissions you need. This is one of the important tabs here. And then we have this one, go to the authentication tab, redirect URI. This is also important. By the way, I have covered all these points in the script, which I have shared in the chat window. I'll probably again share it. This has step-by-step details. We'll be running through these demos, and then you'll be able to sort of follow these step by step. I'm going to leave in my details. You will be able to email me, and if you have any confusions, feel free to ask questions to me. All right. Now, once, let's say the redirect URI, this is an important part. You need to sort of tell where you're going to redirect once the whole process is done. The other important features are certificates and secrets, where you'll be able to create a credentials which will be utilized in the app. And then, yeah, I think these are some important pointers. I have there is a quick start for app registration. You pretty much go ahead and check out. You also have app roles where you'll be able to add, create app role permissions for your apps. And then there is a manifest which sort of shows up all the settings that you have uploaded, or you have it in this app as part of your app registration. All right, since now we have crossed this path of app registration, let me get back to my sample, the demo that we have. And what are we going to do in the demo, right? So I'm using a library called flutter.http. I'm not sure how many of you have used it, but it essentially sort of makes it easy to call HTTP calls, and I'll talk about it more. But then what were we using here? We're using the normal identity.client, and then I'm using the floral.http and the other system libraries. And what are we doing here? I'm trying to get my profile information. If you remember, we ran in our Graph Explorer, we ran this API, right? And it sort of gave us some set of details. I want to be able to do that through my sample. And how do I do it, right? So let me go through the sample and explain you what I'm done here. So this is the client ID, which is essentially very important for you to sort of run any apps, and where you get it is in your app registration. You just go here and go to overview. You'll have it as part of, yeah, here it is, client ID. And let me get back. And then we essentially instantiate we essentially use public client application builder. That's a class, and we create the app. And once we have this app, what we do is we sort of give in the scopes, right? And we talked about the permissions that are needed for the app. So if you see here, I'm sort of requesting for 3 permissions. And what happens when you do this is essentially the user will be consented, prompted for these, you want to use these permissions. Do you want to go ahead and consent? And if any of it needs admin permissions, the admin will be consented, and then they'll be able to go ahead and provide you that permission. They can as well do it beforehand. Like, let's say I, as a user, when I'm registering, I sort of go ahead and declare my permissions here. I can do a grant admin consent for Applify1 and sort of give consent. I've already, if you see, granted for Applify1. So if it's pre-configured, then an admin can go ahead and do this. Otherwise, it will be an app experience where you'll be consenting, and then the admin has to consent it back either through the app or through the portal, and you'll be able to use it. Okay, now let me get back to my demo. Okay, so what happens now is I'm using this acquire token interactive and sending in my scopes. And then once we do this, we sort of get this result, and we get a token. And with the token, what we do is we sort of call in the graph APIs, right? And how do we do it is with this API, where we sort of do this, this is using the floral HTTP that I could call that I said. I'm essentially, if you see, I'm not doing an HTTP client calls. I'm just putting in my URL and using this parameter, which is part of the library again with auth bearer token. Essentially, what we are doing is through these calls, we are getting a bearer token, which sort of you sort of first hit the authorize endpoint, and then you hit the token endpoint and get an access token or a bearer token, which you will use here. And with that, you call in the Microsoft Graph APIs. Here, what I'm doing is I'm calling the same API. Okay, it looks like there is some issue with my. I'm going to turn off the camera just to save some bandwidth, as well as essentially, ensure that we have a good bandwidth for the demos that we are showing here. Okay, let me go back. And I'm pretty much printing out the information here. The same here as well. This is again another graph API that I'm calling. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fetch details of my OneDrive, right? And then we'll print out that. Okay, so let's go to I have a terminal ready, and I use this terminal for let me get to the demo. Okay, so let's do a .NET space run. And when you do a .NET space run, it should ask you to, it should ask for your credentials. Okay, so take some time. Okay, it's here. Okay, essentially, let me get my details. I will, let's say, let's use another user, and I've already gone through the authentication experience before. Otherwise, you would be getting consented in case you don't have a permission, and you go through that experience. Let me get back to the. Okay, so if you see, we've gotten. By the way, I hope the font's good. In case the font's not, you're not able to read it, let me know. I'll maximize the font level as well. Essentially, if you see, we are just dumping information here as well as here. And this is my user profile information, and this is my OneDrive data. All right, so we have established that you will be able to do your Graph API calls with the .NET SDK, where you sort of go through this interactive experience of getting a token. And once you get a token, you pretty much call the API. An important point I want to mention as part of any app is to ensure the redirect URI. The redirect URI that you provide here has to match the redirect URI in your app. And if you see what is my redirect URI, it is essentially the same. Otherwise, what is going to happen is you're going to end up in scenarios where you will get those mismatch URI errors. Okay, that's good. We have established that we are able to do a lot of learning through Graph Explorer, and you will be able to run the .NET sample and essentially implement what you see in the Graph Explorer. Let's get back to business and let's see what else we have. Okay, app registration, we covered this part where we talked about the most important features as part of app registration. And then we also covered a .NET sample where we called us the same API which we called in Graph through a .NET application. Now, let's look at Graph SDK and Auth SDK, right? What we did here, right, in this demo is we sort of pretty much we did not use the Graph SDK. We used what we have through the MSAL libraries, and then we pretty much called the API interactively to get the token. And then once we had the token, we did like HTTP REST calls, like essentially what you do through Graph Explorer. We did the same through .NET SDK. But do we have any, what do you say, like let's say SDKs for Graph? Yes, we have a lot of them. And let's go to NuGet.org to see which one we have. Okay. Let's search for Graph. Okay, we have Microsoft.graph, Microsoft.graph.core. Then we also have Microsoft.graph.auth. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to utilize Microsoft Graph.auth and Microsoft.graph to call into our Graph APIs. And let's see if you use SDK, what changes, right? Let me get back to my demo. So here's the demo that we have created. And through this demo, what are we going to do? Let's say, I'm going to use the same API which we used in the previous demo, which is to call in and get profile information, but I want specific details, right? Like, can we get my display name, right? If you go to this output, so here is the output for the my profile API, and if I want my display name, I'll have to use, this is JSON data. I'll have to use a lot of JSON classes to sort of filter through and get my display name. And let's say I also want like my job title as well, and I can get a job title. And can I also get a picture? Yeah, you can. And you pretty much have to do a lot of plumbing code. You have to add a lot of plumbing code. But the beauty of Graph SDK is that it sort of helps you get these details pretty easily with just the same kind of APIs that you called in your previous sample. Through this sample, we're going to do the same, but just call into a couple of APIs. And the other important point is I want to mention is about graph.auth, Microsoft.graph.auth and Microsoft.graph. Microsoft.graph.auth, the specialty is that if you observe our code here is slightly different from what it was in the previous demo. This demo, if you see, we're sort of doing this redirect URI, which is like having like you using the client ID and sort of instantiating it and then sending in our scopes. And if you see here, I'm not doing any token calls. I'm just using interactive authentication provider as part of graph.auth and sending in my app and scopes. And what that returns is it provides me a provider which I can use to sort of instantiate my graph client, right? And This graph client is essentially having, like most, like, you can use this to sort of query and get all the information that you need for your, let's say, your requirements, right? And in this case, what I said is I want to be able to get specific information, like let's say I want a job title, right? And what I'm going to do is I am getting a graph client and then doing a request call to get the query to query the details that I need. And once I have those details, it will be like, I'm using, it's part of this variable me. And then I want like a photo. I want to sort of like have like a display picture of mine. One. And are there any questions, by the way, in the chat? OK, in case you have any questions, feel free to ask me and I'll be able to chime in. But then essentially what we are doing here is we are sort of doing this request call, and then we are storing the we want the details of my job, and B, we want the display name. So we sort of do that, right? I mean, we don't really have to go through any plumbing code. It's just simple calls that we are doing here, and we will be able to get that, right? I just want job title. I've already done a request call. I've requested for the details and it's part of me, and I'm just doing a me.job title and me.display name. All that plumbing code is already taken care for you, right? And I also want to, let's say, my display picture. Let's say I want to like store the display picture. I will be able to do another call where I want the photo content, and I will store it, let's say, in the same folder. Let's try to store it in the same folder. OK, let's see. Let's run this and see what happens. Let me clear my screen. And for .NET Run, we'll be able, we'll be again asked to authenticate ourselves since it's a different app. And let's use Megan's credentials. And by the way, I've already given credential information beforehand. Let me go back to, OK, it looks like we didn't change the. Sorry for that. Let me go to the right folder where our demo is. And then do this again. We should be asked the credentials again. OK. Let's say authenticate. Let me close these browser instances and now get back to my sample. It is taking some time to query it. And if you see, I'm sorry, I think it's already done. I'm looking at the wrong. OK, if you see here, it has already gotten me details. It has gotten my job title, marketing manager, and it has gotten my display name as Megan Bowen. And then it has also stored the JPEG file. Let's see. Let's go back to the folder. Yeah, it's here. Yep. By the way, all these things are provided in a step-by-step format in the GitHub link I pasted in the chat window. As part of the upload, we'll also provide that GitHub link in the description so that you can use this and go step by step and redo this again. OK, now that we've established Graph SDK and Auth SDK are great, let's see if we can take this one level ahead and see if we can do some advanced querying, and let's see what else can we do. OK, before we go there, I want to establish a couple of things that we have done here, right? Graph API is language agnostic, right? There are no specific designs, patterns, and semantics for every system that you want to know. Like it's just one unified API, right? I did a couple of calls here. I called into OneDrive and I called into user data, right? I didn't have to know anything specific to, let's say, OneDrive. I didn't have to know its semantics or its patterns. I didn't have to know semantics and patterns for user, right? I just use the same syntax and just did a REST API call, right? It is language agnostic, and it is sort of like, it is sort of like platform agnostic as well. There are advanced queries that you can use. I'm not sure if you're aware of OData, but then Graph uses OData. It supports Delta, Webhook, Pagination. We'll look at Pagination in the upcoming samples, but then you can also use Delta to sort of query and get, like, let's say there is a scenario where you have a user, like 100 users that you have sort of queried, right? And you've got to getting that query. Now you can set up a webhook as a notification to sort of help you when the users change. And what you can do is you can do a Delta query to only get, like, let's say, the users whose properties have changed. And with the combination of Delta and Webhook, you'll be able to do that, and Graph supports that, right? A lot of tooling support. We already looked at the Graph SDK, how it helps you your time and effort by not writing the plumbing code that is required, as well as very easy way of querying. And then the whole permissions and consent framework, that we went through, the advanced permissions, the admin consent experience, and the user consent experiences. Okay, now let's try to look at a sort of like an advanced graph queries. How can we sort of implement advanced graph queries through these couple of samples? Let me get back to my sample. We are going to look at this demo here. Okay. Essentially, if you see, there are multiple operations that Graph supports, right? I think we have a slide for it, but it's ahead. Let me just pull it up for the case of, yeah. So these are some of the basic query parameters that Graph supports, like $filter, $select, $order by, $top, $expand, and $count, and $search. So you will be able to use these in the graph queries that through the Graph Explorer or through the API or through your .NET application, or let's say an application which you're coding in a particular language. Let's try to, in this sample, what I have done is we are going through the same experience of sending in scopes and getting your tokens. And once we have the tokens, we instantiate the client. And what I'm essentially doing here is I want to sort of like get an email which has a specific subject, and with that specific subject, I want to sort of like dump out the attachment names, right? That's very specific operation, right? And you can see essentially I'm just doing it through one line here, right? And let me show you my inbox. And yeah, it's here. Getting to the inbox. Okay, here it is. And I have like very less number of emails, like just 7 or 8 emails. And in that email, I have one particular one where I have this one email and it has an attachment. I want this specific email. How do I get it? And this is how you get it. We pretty much with this one line where it says, I'm calling in messages. So in this messages, that's the API that I'm going to call. For that, you need a specific permission, mail.read, and I'm setting in a new permission if you see. And what we do is we pretty much call client.me.messages.request, and then we are using this $filter, right? What is that filter? What are we filtering for? We're filtering for a subject which is equivalent to tribute to PRK, right? And then it should dump out and expand the attachments, right? And then we just instantiate it. Let's say in scenario where we have multiple calls, we have set up this for each loop where we go through multiple emails and just dump out the information. Okay. All right, now let's go to our terminal. Get to the right folder. Okay, let's do a .NET run. Again, go through the experience of providing your credentials. Let me select the right user. Okay, it's done. If you see, it has already dumped out the information. The subject is this. It was received at this time, and the attached details has this text. Okay, that's good. Now we pretty much established that you can use Graph SDK not just to do simple API calls, but you can also do advanced querying where you can use any of the filter and any of those operations, those 7 operations that I showed you. Okay. Let's okay. So now I want to take it up one level higher, and where let's say you are utilizing a lot of different API calls and you want to debug what support do we have, right? Graph SDK provides you a good amount of support for those scenarios as well. And to showcase that, I have this demo where what we're doing is here we are not really calling any, if you observe, I'm not doing a request.async call to request anything. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm trying to mimic a scenario where you're doing a Graph API call and it's not giving you the right set of details, and you want to know what is the Graph API that is getting called. Like let's say here in this case, I've sort of made it pretty straightforward. I have utilized a scenario where I'm just doing a client.me. This is the call I'm doing. But in a scenario where you're doing an advanced call where you're using filter, and let's say it's not getting you filter or order by or any of those parameters, and it is not getting you the required information, I want to figure out what Graph API am I calling. Is there a mistake in the query that I'm creating? Can I just dump out the query anyway through the .NET SDK? Of course, you have. I love using Visual Studio Code. I'm not sure if you use any other editor, but then Visual Studio Code provides you tremendous amount of debugging information with respect to watch variables or breakpoints and all those details you can do. But then if I want to sort of dump out the query that I'm using, you can use something called request builder. And how do I do that is, this is this class, request builder class. What I'm doing is I'm just trying to load in the Graph API call I'm doing into the request builder and just dumping it, right? We are having a simple call where we do this client.me profile information Graph API call, and then this advanced call where I'm trying to get messages, which all the messages which has sort of a high importance kind of high importance bang emails. Let's get to the terminal and let's see what's going to be the output. Okay, let's do a .NET run. This time we're not gonna be asked for any authentication because it's not doing any call. It's not doing any API call. It doesn't need a token. It's just doing a simple dumping out the request. If you see it's dumped out the request URL, if you see it is here, it is dumping out the me profile call, and then this is the Graph API call, right? And now let's say what you can do is you can pretty much go copy this Graph API call and run this in your Graph Explorer and see if that returns right details to sort of figure out, okay, am I doing something wrong, or is there something wrong with the SDK or anything like that? Okay, that's about it. Now let's get, let's take it one level higher and see what else we have. Now I want to showcase a demo where consider a scenario where you have you want to get all the emails of a particular user. Let's say you have 10,000 emails and I want to get all the emails of the user. What do? I pretty much 1,000 emails. There will be a limit as to how much data will be returned by Graph. It cannot essentially return you all the 10,000 or 1 million emails. It has to sort of filter the emails and send it to you. And what we do is Graph does pagination, where essentially there is a next data link that is sent to you, which can be which can be queried through Graph SDK, and you can again sort of loop through to figure out if there are additional emails. Let me show you a quick demo, and for that I have this demo where what we are doing through this is, let me show you the code, and we can go step by step through the code, and I'll show you what I'm doing here. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm trying to dump out all the groups that a user is part of, right? If you see here, there should be a call for groups. Let me search. I guess I need to pretty much let me rerun it. Okay. Now let me try to find the group call. Here it is. All the groups in my organization, right? Let's see if I can run this. Yeah, it did run, and I got all the groups in my organization. So can I do this through the .NET application and get all the groups? And what it says here is that it has, there could be scenarios where this can be like a lot of here. There are not a lot of like groups. I don't really have a lot of sample data to do the pagination, but I can show you through code what you have to essentially do to sort of run through it. And then you can do a lot of different things, right? I mean, we talked about dollar filter. We talked about, let me show you what are those operations. So just to take a little bit of diversion, these are different parameters that we have. You can do dollar count, and you can do dollar expand, dollar filter, dollar order by, dollar search. We already saw dollar or filter through the code. You can do all of these operations through your SDK. And by the way, definitely look for what are the look for the doc, and how you can do that is here if you see there's a like an icon which if you click, it will take you to the doc, the official doc, and it talks about what is the group resource type and what are those different methods as part of this call. And then if you go to a particular one, it also explains in more detail as to like what are those permissions you need delegated, and what is it a post call, or all those other details. And sometimes you will also have some important notes, right? All right. Okay, let me get back to the code. Okay. Essentially, what we are doing here is we are doing the same groups call. Here is the groups call, like transitive member of. This returns you all the groups, and then puts it here. And what we figure out through this, we figure out if your my groups that is returned is null. If it is not null, then we enter this loop where we sort of try to dump out the group display names with their group IDs. And I'm sort of putting it all as part of one string. And then what we do is we pretty much dump out what do you say, like we dump it out as a text, but in a scenario where, let's say, we have paginated the data, graph has returned data in pages. What you have to essentially do is we have to look for the next page request, which is essentially odata.next link when you look at the raw response from graph, right? And if you see that it is not null, and we try to again ensure that the next page request is part of my groups, and again look through, dump it to the string, and continue this process until everything is taken care of. And then we just print the string. That's all. Okay, let me use the same. I've run this demo before, so let me rerun it and sort of show you what happens. This time we should be asked for authentication again, since we are doing a request call here. Will take a minute. Okay, we are there. Let me use Macon, and yeah, it pretty much returns the details. So essentially, this is how it works, and it paginates, like whenever the data is paginated, you will be able to sort of check for the next link and get through the details. All right, let's move on. Now, there are a couple of more important concepts that I want to talk about, and one more demo that I want to cover. So what we are talking about here is Microsoft Graph Toolkit. What is Microsoft Graph Toolkit, right? Uh, we looked at a lot of different APIs, which sort of like, where, we called in user profile, we called in people API, we call in task API, or we call in mail API. But how do I build the UI components for it? Of course, you can use your own UI framework like JavaScript, like any JavaScript based or Vue or anything like that. But then we also have this product called Microsoft Graph Toolkit, where you will be able to sort of utilize a lot of different components that we have built for you. Like if you see here, we have a login component that is built. So this is essentially a UI component, which is going to call in to the Graph API. The required Graph API is to do the magic for you. Reusable, sort of like agnostic, can be used on any framework kind of a thing, right? So I'm showcasing a couple of them here. Let's try to do a quick demo. To go to Graph Toolkit, you have to go to https mgt.dev. Let me go to that and let's see what Graph Toolkit is. Okay, here's the playground, and you will be able to do a lot of different things. This is the agenda, like it sort of gets you the agenda thing. You just have to go and reutilize it in your application, and you'll be able to utilize it. And it is agnostic and can be used anywhere. Let's try to use something else. Let's try to get people. A people component. If you see, I'll be able to, like, it's showing you 5 users. I'll be able to control a lot of different things here. Let's say show max, let's say 8. Then it should be able to show you 8 users, and you will be able to sort of reuse it in your application. We have a lot of these components, and a lot of these are getting added as well. We also have a login component where you can pretty much, it shows a sample user here, pretty much sign out, and you can do a lot of different things with just this simple line of code, right? All right. With that established, it was a quick demo. If you need more details, I am leaving a training link for you in my GitHub script, which you can go revisit and go through a detailed, like there's an hour training that was done in the recent build. You can go through that training and try to build samples using Graph Toolkit. Okay, let's get back to my slides, and we have 10 more minutes, and I want to like sort of cover the taking away thing for you so that it's sort of we sort of know where we are. Okay, this is like, some of the tips to become a pro developer for Graph. And by the way, if you're wondering what is this giraffe, this is like our official, what do you say, like a icon, or what do you say, like this is an official thing. It's not something that I've made up. Microsoft Graph team in Microsoft uses this as our icon or something, like, I'm not getting the right word, but then you get the idea. So how do you become a pro dev in Graph? What are those important tips? Let's go through them. There are 5 of them that I have listed here. Let's go through them one by one. Master these operations, right? These are the standard REST API operations: the list, get, create, update, delete, invoke, patch. Know that these are the operations that you have to do, and if you master these, I think you should be good. What is it that is important here? Remember, always remember, if your code doesn't need to get a particular response, then opt out. Do not send unnecessary data over the wire. If you sort of like, like in scenarios where you just need the display name and you don't need all the other information, don't query for it. Just do those exact operations, right? By the way, there is like, scenarios where your services return no for, and that happens for a lot of post like patch and put calls. Remember, we support something called return equal to minimal header. When you do that, it will respond back to you with a minimal response. And then Master these operations. These are some of the 7 operations we have, like filter, select, order by, top, expand, count, and search. Master these operations. Like I mentioned before, do not query. Always try to use the filter operation and try to sort of filter through the result and only get the response that you need. Use select if you need, only some columns and not all the columns. And yeah, the tips are essentially choose the properties your app really needs and not anymore. Don't send unnecessary data over the wire. Tip, use select and likewise use filter. Like in this case, we are just doing this query call where we are like given name / comma email. That's what we're going to get. We're not going to get all the details apart from these. So choose the records that your app really needs and not anymore. Don't send unnecessary data over the wire. Use filter. This is an example where you only want specific details, like for instance, wherever the department is sales, we need those details. And what do I need? I need only the name and email. So you just do that. And by the way, you can combine a couple of operations and get the data. Like in this case, if you see, we have sort of like combined $filter and $select. Okay. Another important point which we actually showcased in the demo is the pagination. Always consider that data might be paginated on the server side and ensure that you handle it through the code like we showcased in our sample. Always expect that the odata.next link will be there, that property will be there in the response, and you write code that way so that users get a very good experience. So this is essentially what we talked about. And I talked about the raw response, and in the raw response, you pretty much get this odata.next link, which you will be able to utilize and again, get the next set of results, and you keep doing it in loop until there are no results. All right. Okay, one more important point, which I sort of touched upon, is webhook notifications and the Delta query calls. In combination, when you use it, you will be able to query users and then just use the Delta query to get the changed users. We did talk about it. It is very important, like to sort of use the webhook notifications, because you can only use the Delta, but then you'll not be able to figure out what would be the optimal polling interval. So you need to use combination of both. We are not covering it as part of this demo, but there are a lot of different trainings as part of where they use Delta and webhook notifications. You can check them out. But essentially, this is an important tip where you want to utilize this when you're doing graph calls. And last but not the least, the most important point is go with the least privilege approach. Only request for permissions which are absolutely necessary and only when you need them, right? Be very thoughtful when you configure your app because this will directly, it will impact an end user in case you're asking for a permission which is not already declared. They will be consented for it, and they'll have to go through the admin consent experience if admin is need to be consented or if a user is need to be consented. All right. And then when you're building a multi-tenant app, expect that the customers to have various application and consent controls in different states. So that's why, as a developer, you should pretty much declare your permissions that you need beforehand and ensure that the user experience goes better. And always try to ensure it's not app only for scenarios where you need user interactive kind of scenarios. I think these are the important tips that I had. Essentially, to sum it up, know the 7 basic operations, learn the 7 basic query parameters, watch for server-side pagination, investigate other query patterns, and use least privileged permissions. So these being established, we'll go to the next slide where I want to talk a little bit about AD Graph. As you know, AD Graph is getting retired, and essentially we want you to migrate to Microsoft Graph, which is what we covered throughout this, throughout the demos and in this session. Essentially, how do you migrate is you review the differences between the APIs, you examine the API use, and you review app details, deploy, test, and extend your app. So this is what we do, and this is how you migrate your app. That's about it. But then I just want to take a moment to thank my colleague Kyle Marsh, who helped me come up with some of the demos as well as the tips here. And there's this GitHub link. He'll be posting a lot of samples. You can go check it out. This slide will be shared. It's part of the GitHub link, so you can pretty much look at the slides and rerun the demos as well. That's about it. These are our title sponsors, Microsoft, EY, and the community partner Elastic. Learning partners, developers who are ahead, security partner Fightian. And these are different communities. Go ahead, join them and converse with a lot of different folks about technology. That's about it.